Free to practice.
Okay, thank you. So first of all, I want to thank the organizers for inviting me in this nice place. So in this talk, I will use a lot of materials that have been already mentioned in some previous talks. And since we are in the Simons Institute on the theory of computing, I will emphasize some interaction between practical computation and theoretical results in computer science. So I will mainly focus on what Shaugata called the critical point method in his talk. Actually, the title of this talk could have been another one, which is the following: polynomial system solving over the reals. What can exact computation do nowadays? Because I will present some progress on the critical point method, mainly using exact computation and algebraic techniques. I did not provide this title to the organizers because I felt it was a bit arrogant, to be honest. Because actually polynomial system solving over the reals is a very wide subject. This book by Shaugata Basu, Ricky Pollack, and Marie-Françoise Roy covers almost all topics about this subject, and this talk does not cover almost all topics about this subject. So mainly I will not speak about univariate problems, which are important and on which there is still a lot of activity for isolating the real roots of univariate polynomials. I will not speak about how to decompose semi-algebraic sets with nice properties. And I will not speak about certificates of positivity, which is one of the rare topics about polynomial system solving over the reals that is not addressed in this book. What I will speak about is some chapters that I would like a lot of you to read if it is not done. So the content of the chapters 13 to 16 in this book. And in this chapter, the algorithmic problems which are addressed are the following. So you are given a polynomial system of p equations and some inequalities. So for the moment on this slide there are inequalities, and in the rest of the talk, for simplicity, we will forget the inequalities. All our polynomials will have n variables and rational coefficients, and capital D will denote an integer that bounds the maximum total degree of our input. So these are our basic inputs. These inputs define semi-algebraic sets in the real space, and what we are interested about is having decision algorithms about the existence of real solutions to this system. And here I really mean a decision algorithm, so I want to be sure about the output. Sometimes I may want to compute sample points in each connected component of such semi-algebraic sets. I would like also sometimes to describe the projection of these semi-algebraic sets on a linear subspace. And for instance, this asteroid here was obtained as the boundary of the projection of some semi-algebraic sets that appeared in a quantifier elimination problem to analyze the stability of a partial differential equation. So these kind of problems arise in many applications. And here what you see is the trisector of the Voronoi diagram, which is a fundamental object in computational geometry, of three lines in the space. And this came in an application with Daniel and Sylvain Lazare and Hazel Everett. And here what they wanted to do is to understand the topology of this trisector, which is an algebraic surface, and they wanted to count the number of... Sorry?
I don't understand. What is this picture of?
So the Voronoi diagram of some objects in the space is a partition of the space that into cells that contain points which are closer to some sites. You see what I mean? No, I am not clear.
Nearest neighbor partition.
How do you say this?
Well, you want to know which points are closest to a given line, and then there are obviously places there where there's a tie or
And
triple
the
tie.
shaded region is the boundary.
Exactly. And his English is much better than mine. Thank you, Frank. And to do that, we need reliable software, because there are decision algorithms, and we want to be sure about what we compute. And we will rely on the knowledge of the complexity of the problems we deal with. Okay, so let's see what was the state of the art for some problems. So Shaugata spoke about this contribution by George Collins about the cylindrical algebraic decomposition, which partitionates into cells semi-algebraic sets, and from which you can extract almost all information you want about the topology of the semi-algebraic set. So there is still a lot of activity around this algorithm, and it has been implemented, and these implementations are still maintained and improved every year. So let me mention in particular KeepCAD, which is developed by Chris Brown in the US, and also the implementation by Adam Strebonsky in Mathematica, which are extremely good. And there is also one which is easy to use in Maple. So this is about CAD. The drawback of this algorithm is that so it computes so many things that actually the complexity is doubly exponential in the number of variables. And the quest for algorithms in singly exponential, the quest for algorithms which have complexity which are singly exponential in the number of variables started in the 80s actually, with some papers in 88 by Grigoriev and Vorobyov and John Caney, where they started to provide algorithms which have complexity d power O of n. So I remember that d, capital D, is the maximum degree of the input polynomials, n is the number of variables, and here I provide the complexity estimates where there is no inequalities. And for the existence problem, so this is the complexity. And you see that there is a kind of hierarchy. So you can compute the real dimension in such a complexity. The connectivity problem, so the problem of deciding if 2 points in the solution set lie in the same connected component, looks more expensive than this one, for instance. So there has been many work on this. And these are actually huge complexity improvements compared to what CAD brings. And these algorithms were intended essentially to prove that it is possible to get better algorithms in theory than CAD, and not really to design implementations. So the primary goal at that time, at the end of the 80s, was to know if we can improve these doubly exponential bounds. So then, a very natural question is the following. We have complexity results. Can we derive from complexity improvements practical improvements? It's a very natural question. And so this is my primary goal, actually, to obtain fast and reliable software that covers these problems and whose practical behavior actually, show that there is a complexity improvement. And to do that, the basic idea is to understand in a better way the complexity of the algorithm and to look at what happens carefully, especially in the complexity constant, which is here in the exponent. Because it is clear that if it is 1000, it is not the same information than if it is 2 or 3. Okay, and this is what we have tried to do with my collaborators, and these are some of the results we obtained, and I will explain how we have obtained them in a few minutes. So we have, so here, all the complexity statements are for deterministic algorithms. And what we have allowed is randomized algorithms. So actually our algorithms make an assumption on the system of coordinates, which is satisfied generically. And when it is not satisfied, we change our initial coordinates. Since we use exact computation, we want to be able to check that these linear change of variables are actually okay. But what we do is that we essentially make the assumption that the first linear change of variables that we do is okay. And then we have, complexity statements like this one. So for instance, we are able to decide the existence of real solutions to polynomial systems of equation in time, which is essentially cubic in this degree bound. And you will notice, for instance, that in the quadric case, it is naturally polynomial in the number of variables. P is, remember, the number of, it is a codimension. It is the number of polynomial equations. And that's it. And all this is implemented in a software. So at that time, I did not know what was the meaning of RAG in English, but actually RAG stands for Real Algebraic Geometry. Okay. So let's see how we obtained these good constants in the exponent. And next, I will speak about what has been done recently on the connectivity, because on the connectivity problem, because there has been some excitement about this problem in the last 5 years. Okay. So the basic idea of the critical point method is essentially to perform a reduction on the dimension of our problem as fast as possible. So for instance, when you start from an n-variate problem, you want to decide the existence of real solutions to your polynomial system of real equations. You want to reduce this problem to a univariate problem and find essentially a new polynomial system that will have real solutions if and only if your input has. And this new polynomial system has this nice triangular form that Agnes called rational univariate representation yesterday, that some other people call the Kronecker representation, or rational parametrizations, and so on. But essentially what it is that you express the coordinates of your space, the coordinates of the solutions, by evaluating a univariate rational fraction at the roots of another one. And you can look at the quantifier elimination problem, the one-block quantifier elimination problem, as a parametrized version of this problem. So you can try to rewrite your input system like this one, and these are the coordinates on which you want to project, and clearly you have reduced these problems, these n-variate problems, to one-variate problems, and here there are R parameters. And for the connectivity queries, what you may want to do is to compute a special curve that we will call roadmap, and this special curve will have the property that it has a non-empty and connected intersection with all components of the real solution set of your input. This way, you reduce the connectivity queries in high dimension to connectivity queries in dimension 1. And these curves, these roadmaps, you can encode them with a kind of rational parametrization. Okay? So this is in some sense, what we want to compute, and doesn't tell us why these techniques are called the critical point method techniques. And the solution is this picture. So we do that by exploiting properties, classical and very standard properties of critical points in Morse theory. And we reduce our problems essentially to polynomial optimization problems. So for instance, imagine that you have an input equation that defines such a solution set. If you want to know if there are real solutions, you may exhibit a polynomial function, for instance, the projection on this green axis, and try to optimize this polynomial function on your blue real solution set, and you will get finite sets of points that you can represent this way. Okay? And these finite sets of points have this nice property that when you project them on the green axis, you obtain something which is the boundary of the projection, and from this you can describe actually the projection of your real algebraic set. Okay? So this situation is very easy because we are in a compact and smooth situation. But it is a very basic idea. So what we have done is that we have investigated another object that is actually very close to these critical points, that generalize them in some sense, which are called polar varieties, which are introduced for a long time by Todd and Severi. And so imagine that you have an input algebraic set. So now we forget the real world. Have an input algebraic set. And you consider the canonical projections pi sub I on the first I coordinates. And the polar variety Wi associated to this projection pi sub I and the variety we want to investigate is essentially the solution set of the points at which your input equations vanish. That is very natural. And some truncated Jacobian matrix has a rank defect. Okay? And the top experts among you will recognize here some higher dimensional critical loci, which is what it is. So we can take an example and retrieve our sphere in the 3D space. So we knew these critical points and the higher dimensional polar variety contains these critical points, and is actually this equator, which is the red curve, which is also the set of points at which, when you look at the projection of the tangent space on the horizontal axis, there is a, so the dimension of the projection is not 2. Okay. So we previously saw in several talks that there are several ways to define these polar varieties, to model them. So either we choose a determinantal modeling by writing that the maximal minors of this matrix vanish, or we introduce Lagrange multipliers, and we have an almost bihomogeneous polynomial system that such that the projection on the X space of the solution set of this, the Zariski closure of the projection on the X space of this Lagrange, of the solution of this Lagrange system is actually our polar variety. So these are the objects that we will study. And we start by trying to understand what is the geometry of these polar varieties. So, actually, what so remember that remember that the polar variety is associated to a projection. So Wi is associated to pi sub I. Wi minus 1 is associated to pi sub I minus 1, etc., etc. And if you look at the various formulations I have given, it is rather easy to figure out that there is a kind of hierarchy between these polar varieties because Wi, sorry, this is the other way. W1 is contained in W2, etc. Okay? So, and we expect that so W1 is the union of these 2 points, and W2 is the critical curve. And it is clear that these 2 points lie in the critical curve. And so we always have these inclusions, and the question is, can we use these polar varieties to have a kind of descent on the dimension? Because remember that we want to reduce our existence problem to 0-dimensional problems. And actually, it was proved by Bang, Giusti, Heinz, Backup, and Pardo, who actually have popularized the use of these polar varieties in symbolic computation, that in generic coordinates, we have a good control on the dimension of these polar varieties. And the next question is to know if we can use these polar varieties to reach all connected components of our real algebraic sets. And to do that, we need to ensure some closedness properties of the projections of the connected components we consider. Because, for instance, if you look now at this blue hyperbola, there is no critical point if you look at the projection on the horizontal axis, because there is this asymptotic phenomena, so this is not satisfactory. And one way to do that is to figure out that actually the number of system of coordinates, the set. So if you change your system of coordinates, you recover closedness properties. That is to say that either the connected components will be projected on the whole line on which you are considering the projection, or it will be a closed set, and actually the points which are at the boundary will be critical points. Okay? And for instance, if you look at this process, so here it's easy because it's curves in the plane, but if you consider d-dimensional algebraic sets, and if you want to look at this process by considering the projection on the first d coordinates, this is algebraically, namely the Noether position property. It allows you to derive this. Obviously, as we learned yesterday, we really don't want, so then this way we could start by considering the first polar variety and then try to make a descent by projecting the polar variety of the polar variety of the polar variety. We learned yesterday that this is not a good idea, and I confirm that it is a very bad idea. So,
Remind me what the Noether position property is?
I will give you a criterion. I will not provide you the exact definition. So assume that you have an equidimensional algebraic set of dimension d, and you look at the projection so if the fiber of actually an arbitrary point so you choose an arbitrary point in your target space. So here I choose the origin center. You look at the fiber. You expect to get a finite number of points, and if this finite number of points actually coincides with the degree of the variety, you are in Nutter position. It is not the
Linear position.
yes. It is not the right definition, but it is a criterion. Yes.
But does this problem go away if we just consider it in the projective space? I mean, take,
Can you repeat?
consider projective varieties instead of affine ones?
I don't want. No, we work with affine real algebraic sets. So we can ensure this. So the Nutter normalization lemma tells us that the first polar variety is good, but actually what we proved 11 years ago with Eric Schost is that actually we can transfer, we can do the first linear change of variables, and next we transfer the Nutter position property to all polar varieties. We don't need to make intermediate change of variables. This way the difficulties that were raised yesterday in the talk presenting Bertini real are overcome, and we have actually an algorithm which is based on the following observation, that if the last polar variety of expected dimension 0 does not meet some of your connected components, then the projection of your connected components is the whole space. And this gives you a nice algorithm to decide the existence of a real solution to your polynomial systems, when actually your polar varieties encode critical sets. And to do this, you need some regularity assumptions, which are not always satisfied because singularities are also in the nature. And for instance, you may want to study, for instance, so let me be clear, these regularity assumptions are satisfied for generic systems. So for the experts, I would say that reduced regular sequence is sufficient. So these regularity assumptions can be removed by actually simulating some deformation techniques. So imagine that we want now to study the semi-algebraic set which lies on the red cylinder, and which is, so this blue surface, this union of the blue surface and this yellow line is actually a Whitney umbrella. And imagine that we want to study this semi-algebraic set, the one which contains this green curve. And imagine that we want to study the projection of this green curve on the revolution axis of your cylinder. Then you are interested in this point. If you compute your polar varieties in a blind way, you will miss it because actually this point lies in the singular locus, and the polar variety will contain this whole line. So what you can realize is that if you deform your Whitney umbrella, you have regularized your process. You have two critical points here, and you can follow these critical points when the deformation tends to 0, and actually you will get this green curve that whose intersection with the Whitney umbrella gives you the point you were searching for. Okay. So we have various geometric techniques we can derive this way by exploiting these properties of polar varieties. We have geometric techniques to decide the existence of real solutions to polynomial equations, but these geometric techniques do not allow you to compute the solutions. You need an engine, and we have the choice between many, and we can investigate what we obtain with these many, actually, except of focusing on one. So we can first look at what happens when we try to use Grobner basis, which is a fundamental object for polynomial system solving. And most of you should know that you can obtain polynomial Grobner basis by computing a row echelon form of a large matrix, which is called the Macaulay matrix, which is obtained by multiplying the input polynomial equations by some monomials up to some degree. And this degree is called the degree of regularity. And essentially, the complexity you get to compute the Grobner basis this way is the size of the matrix up to the power of multiplying matrices. And this special degree, called the degree of regularity, is here, and you obtain this way an intermediate object, which is the most costly part, which is the Grobner basis for the Grave-Lex order.
Omega is the matrix.
Sorry?
Omega is the matrix exponent.
Yes. Yes. And we can try to investigate what is the degree of regularity when you compute zero-dimensional polar varieties. And remember that these polar varieties are defined with systems which have a very special property. Either you use Lagrange systems and they have a kind of natural bihomogeneous structure, or you can look at these systems as, if you look at the determinantal modeling, as the intersection of an affine variety with a determinantal variety which is cut by some equations. And by exploiting some traditional results, actually, in commutative algebra about Grobner bases in the determinantal in determinantal rings, actually, we can bound the degree of regularity by this quantity. And you should notice, for instance, that when capital D equals 2, so in the quadratic case, the degree of regularity does not depend anymore on the number of variables. And actually, this is a proof that Grobner basis on quadratic polynomial equation, on quadratic polynomial optimization problems, when there are only equations, have actually polynomial time in the number of variables. And this is the complexity you get. The exponent actually depends on the codimension. Okay? And in the general case, when you fix P, this is what you get. Okay? The exponent becomes now n times omega. So this is nice. So it provides you actually the fact that under some genericity conditions, in many cases, you can compute in time which is polynomial in the output size, Grobner basis associated to polar varieties. But actually, it is not satisfactory because, so now we have arithmetic complexity results, and it's nice also to go back to the practical situation and to compare the complexity we have with a kind of practical complexity. So since we measure arithmetic complexity, we forget the real world and we do computations over a small prime number so that you really count the number of operations. And you can run F5 algorithms, thanks to Jean-Charles Fougère, on, for instance, quadratic equations, 4 quadratic equations, and on the axis, you put the degree of the output, and on this axis, you put the logarithm of the computation, and you look at the. So naturally, you get a line, since we proved that it's exponential in this quantity. And we can derive, I don't know, can derive the practical complexity. And what we get is actually that the exponent, in this case, is 10.55, which is by far less than 2p omega, even by assuming that omega equals 2, which is far from being proved up to what I understood. So for instance, for p equals 4, you have 2 times p times 4, so 8 times 2, 16, and actually in practice we have 10.55. And the same situation occurs when you have larger degrees, so for instance for quartics. The exponent here we have is actually less than 3. So let's say that in 15 years the situation has changed. 15 years ago we had nice complexity results but no practical results, and we wanted to understand the practical results, the complexity results to have practical results. Now we have practical results, and when we measure the practical complexity, it is much less than the complexities we are able to. So it is.
How does the practical complexity compare to the degree of the actual varieties? These are some determinantal varieties,
Yes.
and they have an actual degree. How does that scale in these examples?
But it's polynomial in the degree.
Does it match the 10 or the 2 or the? So you have a general bound that's just
So in the quartic case, you have the.
You have a determinantal variety that has a particular degree coming from Schubert calculus or something. How does that compare to your exponents 2.48 volume?
So here you have the degree of the variety, power 2.45.
Oh, I see. That's the today.
Yes. So it's surprising. So all these results were proved by Jean-Charles Fogère, Pierre-Jean Spenlauer, and me in 2012. And I want to advertise one very nice paper by Pierre-Jean. So it was proved when all the polynomials had the same degree. And Pierre-Jean very recently had his paper accepted at the Science Journal on Optimization, where he generalized this approach to mixed degrees. So so it's much more general than what we did 2 years ago, because he can handle situations where the input polynomials have not the same degrees, which is the situation you actually have in practice. So much better. So there is not only Grobner basis in life. You can try to use also homotopy techniques, symbolic ones or semi-numerical ones. So here one important parameter is the degree of the polar variety. And in the generic case, this is when all the polynomials have the same degree. This is the generic degree of the zero-dimensional polar variety. And you may try to use an algorithm that could have been mentioned yesterday, which is the geometric resolution algorithm by Marc Justy, Grégoire Le Cerf, and Bruno Salvi, which was designed in 2000, 15 years ago almost, and which actually, how to say, it is a kind of concretization of a long-term effort by several people, Jos Heinz in particular, Luis Miguel Pardo, to exploit evaluation properties of polynomial systems to get algorithms that have complexity which is polynomial in some geometric degree. So these algorithms are incremental, so they are well suited for complete intersections, and in this case you shouldn't use, so if you use this kind of homotopy techniques, you shouldn't use the determinantal modeling because it's not a complete intersection, but you are happy to have the Lagrange system, and by exploiting it by homogeneous structure, you have a cubic complexity in the worst case. Actually, it's a strong overestimation. You can replace this cube by delta square times the complexity of evaluating the input polynomial. Okay? You may also try to use Bertini or PHCPAC or any other homotopy, numerical homotopy techniques. Again, what is done in this setting is that you use the Lagrange system to do that, but in the case of mixed degrees, it's far from being optimal because actually this bound is not sharp when the degrees are mixed, and what we are working on currently with John is to design a dedicated homotopy to the case of mixed degrees that we hope to generalize to determinantal systems. So we have a variety of elimination tools to implement our geometric techniques relying on these polar varieties. And all this is done in this real algebraic geometry library. So it's always difficult to predict what will be the behavior of such a software on a very concrete problem. Essentially, if you remember, the only thing that I can say is that I am sure about is that, so you remember our rational parameterizations that encode zero finite sets of points. And actually the software, you can hope that it will provide you an answer if you know in advance that the degree of Q is not much more than 1 or 2,000, which we can call the algebraic degree of the problem. The issue is that usually you don't know it in advance, and the degree bounds hopefully are not reached. So if you take a dense equation, so which is the worst case, a quartic of dense equation, it takes 2 hours for 6 variables, while CAD implementations remain stuck in this case at n equals 4. But on practical problems, it scales to 8 or 10 variables, because actually these polar varieties also keep track of the geometric structure of the algebraic sets we are studying, and it has been used in various topics, including an industrial application through Erich Kaltofen in the USA. So all this allows you now to decide the existence of real solutions to polynomial equations and inequalities using exact computation, but it does not allow you to obtain some topological informations, such as a connectivity query, but it could. So for instance, so remember that in this case, what we want to compute is a roadmap, that is an algebraic curve whose intersection with the real solution set you want to study is at the same time non-empty and connected. So let's take the torus. So it's a nice, because it's a smooth and compact real algebraic set. So it has a non-empty intersection with the one-dimensional polar variety that you obtain by considering the projection on the plane which is perpendicular to the revolution axis of the torus. So you have these blue curves, so the intersection is not empty, but as you all have noticed, it's not connected. And the big idea of John Kani was to say, we are not afraid, if it's not connected, we can connect them by slicing our torus with hyperplanes. And then the connection is made this way. And here you have to imagine the plane cutting out the torus, and actually these slices are obtained by computing, like yesterday, critical points of critical points. So actually, you all imagine these hyperplanes, and actually these hyperplanes are actually chosen by computing critical points on, you should make a picture. So you have your torus. consider the projection on this horizontal plane, and you take another line in the horizontal plane, and you consider you all understand why I prefer to use these. You consider the critical points of the projection on this line restricted to the critical curve. Okay. And next, you consider these critical points give you some points on the line, and you consider the slice. Okay. And you obtain what John Kani called a roadmap. And this is a recursive algorithm, because so here in the 2D world we have finished, but when the dimension is greater than 2, when you consider one slice, the dimension decreases by 1, and you have to recurse. Make a recursive code.
Except that this section will not be smooth.
Yes, but if you start from a smooth variety, you will have only a finite number of singular points. This you can handle.
And I meant that to take this slice is no longer a smooth variety.
Yeah, but it has a finite number of singular points. If in generic coordinates. So you have issues only when the number of singular points is not finite. Okay, and the number of these critical points that you compute on the critical curves is something like d to the n. And when you do your recursion, you will have to compute some new critical points on. So you may have d to the n slices, and you repeat the process because with one less variable because you have considered a slice, and so on and so on, and you expect something whose output size is like d to n square, O of n square, sorry. And this process was designed initially by John Kani around 88 during his PhD thesis. What he actually had is a probabilistic algorithm with a complexity which is polynomial in the output size. He also provided a deterministic algorithm, but with a much less good complexity. And there has been several works to get deterministic algorithms that had the same complexity as Kani's algorithm. And this was the state of the art until recently, where, so with Eric Schost and next with Shogata Basu and Marie-Françoise, we obtained the first algorithms that improve the exponent here, going from n squared to n times the square root of n. Okay, so we first made it for smooth and compact hypersurfaces, allowing randomization, and next we had a better result with a deterministic algorithm and no assumption. Very general algorithm. And next came a landmark result by Shogata and Marie-Françoise because they succeeded to go from O of n times. So remember that previously we were fighting to have small constants. But here the game is not to have small constants, it's just to have something which is not too big here. So what they obtained is something like nd times soft O of n. Soft O means that you neglect polylogarithmic factors in n. So it's a deterministic algorithm without any assumption. But here we have to be careful. So now we enter in the game of understanding what is hidden in the complexity constant. Because so we need to write everything, and actually the complexity in the exponent is n times the square of the binary log of n. And the output size is smaller, so there is one log that has disappeared. So And happily, the algorithm is not really polynomial time in the output size, but so it's an extremely important result from the complexity viewpoint, but remember that I want to make these kind of things run in practice. So now I want to understand what we can do. Well, I want to have a better control of the exponent. And the first question is, should I work out directly to improve the constant, or should I do my best to remove this log n and this extra log n factor compared to the size of the output? And the answer is that we should remove the extra log n factor because some simple computations show that actually n is less than the square of the binary log of n for n less than 16, and solving polynomial systems with 16 variables is already difficult. But more than that, if the complexity constants here are small, we should use these ones because the square root of n is less than the square of the binary log of n for n less than 2 power 16, which is something like 65. So this is what we tried to do with Eric Schost. And this is the result that we obtained. So it is by far less general and strong than this one because we have strong restrictions. So we recover our smoothness and compactness assumptions. And actually, we will assume that the input is a reduced regular sequence. And what we have is an algorithm which is, so here is the complexity. So here lambda is the log of n minus p, which is the dimension of our input variety. And here is the exponent. And the output size is, so actually the algorithm is almost cubic in the output size. And if you look at, no, it's sub-quadratic in the output size and it's cubic in the degree of the output size. So how to obtain this kind of results? We need to go back to our paper in 2011. So imagine that, so actually you can generalize Kany's approach to, so in Kany's approach he was using, he was considering first a critical curve and next slicing the variety. So that he had an algorithm, a recursive algorithm of depth n. What we can do is, instead of considering a critical curve, we can consider a higher dimensional polar variety and consider, so, and instead of slicing with hyperplanes, take advantage of the fact that here we have a higher dimensional polar variety to consider slices of smaller dimension. Okay, so this is, and what we proved is that actually this generalized scheme of algorithm for computing roadmaps works. The complexity is then d power O of the depth of the recursion times n, and you should all see that if we choose at each step of the recursive calls I of approximately half of the dimension, we have the depth of the recursion, which is the log of the dimension. And this is what we do. So to perform this, to put into practice this kind of algorithm, obviously during the recursive calls, we need to ensure that the polar varieties, for instance, that we consider, satisfy the input assumptions. And this is what we did. So in 2010, actually, we proved smoothness properties. We proved that we can transfer smoothness properties to polar varieties as soon as we consider projections of small enough projections on spaces that have a small enough dimension. And to do that, we use the tool called the Tom Boardman strata, coming from algebraic geometry, actually. So I hurry up to spend more time on the first experiments we did, because so now we have a nice complexity result, but actually you should tell me that I screwed up and I have cheated, because if we go back to the complexity result, here you have 6 times the log of d times n. So here it is written in a compact form, but you should realize that actually it's gigantic, because look at the factor in front of n. It's 3 times 6, it's 18 times n. Normally we shouldn't be able to make any computation with such a, actually it's a huge complexity. It's nice, but it's huge. But still, we tried to implement it. So it's based on the latest Foger's FGB library for computing Grobner bases. No assumption is checked, so you in particular the required change of variables are not, we don't check that if they are okay or not, so in some sense it's not satisfactory, but it is satisfactory if you test the implementation on random dense systems, because you might expect that random dense systems are in generic position. And here is the surprise, actually. So if you take 2 quartics, it's small, but for the moment there is no software that allows you to answer connectivity queries. You can compute roadmaps with input problems having dimension 5, but codimension 2. Small. And in the case of quadrics, you can reach dimension 9. And actually, we spent, so in the implementation, there is much more than what is in the paper, actually. And actually, it works first because we realized that the degree bounds we have are overestimations of what we have actually in practice, even on generic inputs. But more than that, so yesterday it was mentioned that the computation of critical points is difficult, and we need to compute in this algorithm critical points of critical points. And I confirm that it is difficult, but when you understand the geometry of polar varieties, you can improve. We can improve this computation because. So I will try to draw it. Actually, if your plane is generic, the critical curve, when you project it, it's it gives you something like that. Okay. So you have 4 extra points here, which are singular in the projection, and 2 critical points here, which correspond to what you have here and here, and these 4 ones are here, here, and here, and 2 critical points here and here. So this is the projection of the silhouette curve. Okay. Sorry, I am very bad at drawing. And actually, these critical points are not on the critical curve, are not critical points on the input variety, but you can characterize them as, actually they appear in the Tom Boardman strata. You can separate the system because they correspond to the fact that the tangent at this point to the curve is actually normal to the plane. So you can And when you use this kind of tricks that exploit the geometry of the polar variety, this is how you make things work in practice, actually. So I would like just to finish by saying that so all this has been done because there is a strong interaction between algorithmic and software development on the one hand and complexity results. What I wouldn't, obviously I want to advertise my software and say that critical point methods now work in practice and it's very nice and blah blah. But I wouldn't like you to conclude that cylindrical algebraic decomposition is useless. Actually, it's not true. It is the only way to perform quantifier elimination over the reals today. There is nothing else. And the software that are implemented are of high quality. For low-dimensional problems, these algorithms are extremely efficient, actually. I don't know any exact computation software that can compete with the optimized implementation of CAD for two variables, for instance. And that's it. Okay. Thank you.
Questions?
So, when you talk about practical complexity, how does practical complexity of arithmetic operations affect you?
How does it affect me? Actually, it affects the user.
Practical complexity to measure computer time.
No, because the computer time does not only measure the arithmetic complexity, this is not true. It also measures, for instance, the displacement in the memory and so on. So, if the implementation is good enough, most of the timing should be in the arithmetic complexity. Sometimes it is not true. But with Fogger's library for exact computation, it looks okay. And how you measure that, so for instance, he has an option where he prints the number of operations he performs. So that is helpful. But you can also, if you know that the implementation is good enough, what you can do is that you take the timings, you take a logarithmic scale, so you put in the horizontal axis the size, on the vertical axis the log of the timing, and if the implementation is good, you should obtain a line. And this is how you see the practical complexity.
So your graphs that you had on the slide is just wall time on one processor.
No, I think the graphs were the number of operations.
Yeah, so I guess the question is what is...
No, it's timings.
What is
Ooh.
practical complexity?
What is the practical complexity?
How do you define measurement?
And you count the number of... No, the practical arithmetic complexity is the integer you get when you count the number of arithmetic operations you perform when you run your algorithm.
Okay.
And every word is important. The practical arithmetic complexity.
Okay, so in particular in these algorithms you do some arithmetic in finite fields, then you do rational number reconstruction.
Yes. Yes, but here, so again, every word is important. Here we have arithmetic complexity results. For the moment, we don't know if, so we have not proved yet that the bit complexity is what it should be. Something like these complexities with an extra, with an overcost in the exponent that is well controlled, times the bit size of the input integer. These are arithmetic complexity results.
Another question? Well, if not, we'll take a break, and the next talk is at 10:30.